Hey YouTube, this is Marita and welcome to another edition of the Nurse Lounge. And in today's edition, we're going to talk about 10 tips for NCLEX prep and for you to be successful when you take your boards the first time. Tip number one. Oh, one more thing. I have taken notes, so you'll see me look down from time to time just to kind of see where I am in my notes because I want to make sure I give you good information. Okay, tip number one. Preparing for NCLEX begins when you first start nursing school. It is not something that begins your senior year. So your instructors or professors should be giving you questions on your test or quizzes that are NCLEX style. So they're going to be more application kind of questions. They're not going to be what is this? It's going to be more of how to apply what you have learned to a scenario or situation. So it should begin at the very beginning, not the last year of school. Tip number two, it kind of builds off of number one. NCLEX is not a regurgitation of facts. It is a application of concepts and disease processes. So what that basically means is, let's take diabetes, for example. They're not going to ask you, what is diabetes? They're going to ask you questions that involve signs and symptoms of diabetes and what a patient may exhibit on an assessment. And then you have to figure out, based off of best practice and evidence-based practice and current research, which is the best answer or answers, and select all that apply. Tip number three, learn your medications and learn them in their generic and in their trade name. This is something for me that I wish I had did back at that point in time when I took my NCLEX. Hindsight is always 20/20, but I should have known that acetaminophen and Tylenol are the same medication. With that being said, also know your classes of medications, and sometimes it's easiest to learn those when you're going through the certain systems that you're going through. So if you're talking about respiratory system, for example, learn that albuterol is something that you would give someone who has asthma or even COPD or a disease process like that. It's easier to learn them when I learn them with a system versus when I learn them just, this is albuterol and it's respiratory. It's easier to learn that way. Also know that like medications or drugs like Percocet is the same thing as oxycodone, and that Lortab is the same thing as hydrocodone. Those medications are related, but they're not the same. So some people use those interchangeably, but they are not the same medications. I've had patients who are allergic to one, but not the other, or even both. Also know that Lortab has, or hydrocodone has, various names within it. So Lortab, Norco, Vicodin, all those are still the same hydrocodone pill. They're just called different things based on who manufactured that pill. So number four, if you can, do about 25 questions every single night, even if you're on a school break. And the reason why I say to go ahead and do them while you're on a school break and every night is because you need to train your brain how to answer those kinds of questions. A lot of times in those questions, they're looking for something specific. So therefore, you need to figure out which word or what are they focusing on this question. So that way I know which two answers automatically are not the right answers. You can mark those out, eliminate those, and kind of narrow it down from there. So again, start with 25 questions per night and do this with a book or books that have rationales that go with them. So you'll have a better understanding of why a question that you may have gotten wrong is wrong. It will tell you why it's wrong. And it will tell you, of course, why it's right if you got it right. So start with 25 questions per night, most nights. I'm not saying you can't take a break, but I'm just saying make sure you're consistent with it. Once you learn how to answer those questions, you won't have any problems with the NCLEX. Number five, use a NCLEX program, prep program such as Kaplan or UWorld or Hearst Review. Those are just a few. I'm not, really recommending one over another, just whatever your school recommends, if they recommend one. I did take the Kaplan because that's what our school required. And I found it very beneficial. It was a 3-day series in which we came in every day for 3 days for about 8 hours a day. And we actually were taught how to understand concepts and disease processes so that we could know how to take the test. So I remember specifically looking at a picture, and we were talking about hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism. So for hypo, I remember hypo means slow. Hypo, slow, cow. The picture was a cow sitting on a couch eating and doing nothing. The cow was fat, obviously. So therefore, slow, hypo, big, that's what I thought about when I think of hypothyroidism. When I think of hyper or being overactive, it showed us a picture of a runner who was very thin and he or she was sweating and they were just moving really, really fast. And you would see the lines behind them to show how fast they were moving, kind of like the Road Runner with that cartoon. So I remember those pictures. I will never forget hypo and hyperthyroidism because of those pictures. So for us, Kaplan actually did those kinds of things for us to help us learn these concepts and remember them. I found that to be very beneficial for me personally. Number 6, don't get caught up in taking the 75 versus 265 question NCLEX test. I don't know how many students that I've known who, even back when I was taking my NCLEX, my boards, would say, oh, I hope I can get cut off at 75. Well, just know the way the boards is set up or the way that test is set up, it's going to cut off at 75 if it feels that you are minimally safe, that you know exactly what you're doing. Or it also could cut off at 75 when it determines you have no idea what you're doing, so you have failed the test. 75 is not the magic number. Passing the test is the magic number. So if it takes you all 265 questions, which it took me, all 265, then it is what it is. If it takes you 100, it is what it is. Because what's going to end up happening is if you get caught up in that 75 number, if you get to number 76, you will be let down and you will mentally be distracted from that. Like, oh my gosh, you didn't cut off at 75. Get over that. Take as long as it needs to take the test. Also keep in mind when it comes to NCLEX, they actually revamp that test every so many years. I want to say 3 to 5 years. It may be longer or shorter. I'm not sure. But they revamp that test every so often. And as a result, somebody has to take the pilot test. So guess who had to do it the year that I did it in 2004? It was me. I had all 265 questions. At the end of the test, I cried. I got in my car and I just cried because I knew I had failed this test. I was never caught up on the 75 thing, but I certainly didn't think I was going to have to take all 265, but I did. And again, took 5 hours and I was devastated by the end of it. So again, don't get caught up in those numbers. Just know the material and take the test. Tip number 7, try not to work a few days prior to taking your test. I did not work for about a week prior to taking my test. I was already a graduate nurse. I already had a job and I was already working my job. I graduated in May, I worked in June, and I took my test around sometime in July. And so I made sure that I did not work about a week before me taking my test. I wanted to spend all that time really preparing for the test and not functioning or not worrying about working my 12-hour shifts and learning how to do my job. I needed to pass that test. So if possible, try not to work before you have to take that test, at least 2 to 3 days. Number 8, do a test run to the facility. So basically that means the day before or 2 or 3 days before. Go at the time that you would normally go to take your scheduled test. So if you're going to schedule your test for 9 o'clock in the morning, you may need to leave your house, depending on how far the facility is from where you live, at 7:30 to deal with the traffic. So do a test run. You need to think about the time of the day that you take your test, the traffic that time of the day. What if it's in the wintertime, is inclement weather? you need to know, or it's raining. You need to be prepared for that. So go ahead and find the facility. This is not a day that you want to get in the car and say, I think I'm going to go take my test today, and you have no idea where it's at or what side of town it's even on. So go ahead and do a test run a few days before, a week before, just to make sure that you know exactly what to do and where to go, even where the entrance is. Have you ever gotten somewhere and you got there relatively on time? Maybe even 10, 15 minutes early, but because you couldn't figure out which way was the front door, you got there late. So you want to know all these things ahead of time. Number 9, the day of your exam, you want to eat a good meal. Preferably schedule your exam for the first thing in the morning. You hopefully would have had a good night's sleep. You would have gotten up. You should eat you some breakfast if you take it first thing in the morning. You should, if it's not first thing in the morning, make sure you eat before you go. So eat you a good meal before you go take your test. That way you are rested and your brain is fresh. With that being said, if you take your test later in the day, you kind of have to stew over it all day long about this test, about preparing for this test, and you tend to psych yourself out. So if possible, go ahead and take the test as early as you can in the morning so you can have the rest of the day to focus on something else. Cry if need be, but focus on something else nonetheless. Also, arrive about 30 minutes prior to your scheduled time. It is a process to get through and to get ID'd and to make sure that you're the correct person who's supposed to take this test. So you can't show up at 8:55 for a 9 o'clock test, because all the other test takers who are taking it at 9 o'clock will begin promptly at 9 o'clock. They will not admit you to take this test if you're arriving at 8:55. So be there, honestly, about 30 minutes ahead of time. That would be actually perfect. That'll allow you time to get there, kind of mentally get settled, sit in your car for maybe 5 minutes, go in, use the restroom, get you some water, kind of get organized, mentally calm yourself down as you prepare for these boards, and just kind of get into the mental mindset and ready to take this test. So again, arrive about 30 minutes or so prior to taking the test, if at all possible. Number 10. So if you have done 1 through 9, then number 10 is simple. You got this. You have prepared yourself both physically and mentally for this test. You've been taking questions or answering questions throughout your 2 or 1, how many years in your schooling. You have learned how to apply what you have learned in class. So it's not just regurgitating facts. You know how to be on time. You know how to, you've been to a review. You have even study partners maybe who can help you review for this test. So with that being said, take the pressure off, take the test, get through the test. It can take up to 5 hours. It took me 5 hours to take a test because I had to take the whole 265 question test. So it could take some time, so be prepared for that. Oh, back on the other thing, have gas in your car. You can't get up that morning and then, know you don't have no gas in the car and then you're running late. That's back on number 9. Okay, now back on number 10. So you got this. So be mindful that, you got this. You're going to be fine. Just think at the end of this process, if all is well, you will be licensed in your state as a nurse, whether it be an LPN, whether it be a registered nurse, or even if you're advanced practice and you're going back to get your FNP or whatever certification you're trying to get, is still a test. So be mindful of those things. Those have the same format, if you will, as as your state boards is getting licensed. So you will have a license at the end of this. You got this. You'll be fine. And then at that point in time, we can all say, welcome to the world of nursing. And you are licensed, dually licensed, to care for a patient population in which you'll be serving, and to make sure that you know how to care for your patient, and that you are competent, you are safe, and that this patient and their family is rested assured that you know exactly what you're doing as a nurse. With that being said, thank you all so much for watching the 10 tips for NCLEX success. I wish you all the best. Please leave a comment, please share, please subscribe. We got to grow this channel, so please subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you'll know when I upload. With that being said, blessings and take care.